Welcome to Cathedral Talk, a podcast about architecture and Minecraft, where we converse to save Notre-Dame. Hop on the server, gents.
All right.
Server hopping.
I'm on.
Alrighty. So guess what? After you guys guilt-tripped me in the last episode saying, Tom, when are you ever going to build some more sections of that 2-to-1 scale Notre-Dame? I did it! I completed the first level of vaulting for the chevet.
And it looks beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Zach saying dirty things to me in chat.
What? In Minecraft chat or in podcast chat?
In Minecraft chat. I mean, I guess you could say dirty things there too.
We've been having some Wi-Fi troubles today, ladies and gentlemen, so if our conversation is more disjointed than usual, it's because I just couldn't clean it up enough in the edit.
And Tom is also 3 margaritas deep.
Is this going to be a thing now, how many margaritas Tom is drinking for every episode?
I think it should be cumulative. So he had 3 last time, and so it's another 3 this time, so he's 6 deep.
It's water, people. It's water.
See, what I'm trying to do is get your students, all of whom listen to this podcast, instead of giving you apples on Teacher Appreciation Day, to give you triple sec and cointreo.
I have never gotten an apple for Teacher Appreciation Day.
The
only thing teachers get for Appreciation Days are, little awards that say best teacher ever, and then usually a $5 gift card to Starbucks.
That's better than an apple. An apple's like $2.
It's better for my wife, since she's the only one who drinks Starbucks.
I suppose that's true. You don't drink coffee.
No.
But Tom is such a lover of tradition that even if he didn't eat the apple, getting the apple would just raise his spirits.
So let me say that this build, which I just managed to fly to, would require a lot of Starbucks from me to finish. How many hours did this portion take you?
Well, I mean, I think we've been here before. It's just been a while. Last time we talked about it, I think was like episode 5 or 6.
Oh boy.
So last time we visited the 2-to-1 build, I had already completed just the outer wall with the buttresses extending from the wall, sort of radiating out of the large semicircle of the exterior part of the chevet. And we talked a good bit about how the current wall that connects those buttresses is eventually going to get demolished for a wider radius wall, just because Notre-Dame was renovated over time. But for now, this is the state in which it was built from the beginning. But now what I have completed, which was a lot more work, was all the vaulting of the twin aisles that wrap around the central vessel and the apse. This was a very long process because, like I said, this is, usually the hardest things in Minecraft are all the curves, trying to mimic, different kinds of curvature. And all these vaults that have sort of crisscrossed ribbing at different angles in 3 dimensions as you curve around a circle. It's very time-consuming to get something that's aesthetically pleasing.
How many hours do you think to build this? How many hours to plan it? How many hours to mine the materials for it?
I don't think I could answer any of those questions.
Especially since mining the materials, he had help from one of his friends.
Oh, good point.
That's true. Much of the vaulting is made out of the new deep slate. And the reason that I use deep slate in particular, I really like the deep slate tile texture because that has sort of the irregular tiny little bricks, which is kind of similar to the webbing that you find in Gothic vaults. I used a texture pack to lighten it up a little bit. It's a little too dark in the native texture pack for Minecraft.
I'm not seeing that texture pack though, right? I'm just seeing basic.
No, you're seeing just one, but you're probably noticing that some of the webbing is made of the tiled deep slate, and then other parts of the webbing are made of cobbled deep slate. Are you noticing there's different stones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The reason I did that is in my texture pack, I took cobbled deep slate, which I tend to find not especially useful in the vanilla game just because we've already got cobblestone and it's not that different in my opinion. But I took the texture for the cobbled deep slate and I copied the texture of the tiled deep slate, which I really like, and put it in place of the cobbled deep slate, but I rotated it 90 degrees.
I can see how that would help without even being able to actually see that in my own game right now, because that can be annoying that the bricks all face one direction.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted it so that when you look up at the vaults, the webbings all point inwards, which is how it really looks at, the real thing.
Sure.
And I hadn't originally considered this when I was building at first, but after I built one vault, I was like, this would look much better if this was just angled in another direction.
Right.
So I had to figure out which stone was the most worthwhile one to sacrifice. And I was like, I kind of like this deep slate. I kind of like this slate. I mean, they gave us 5 deep slates. So I was like, okay, let me get rid of this deep slate, maybe. I ended up just sacrificing cobbled deep slate. If for no other reason, then again, I don't find its texture, for me, too useful for the things that I tend to be doing, at least right now. And also, cobbled deep slate is sort of the go-to. It can get crafted into anything else, so it's easy to balance out with. If you have too much of one thing, you can turn it into something else.
Once you hunkered down and decided that, okay, I'm going to finish this now, your supplies of materials, were they already all well at hand, or did you have to get even more?
Well, again, the deep slate was a little rough, and I before Zack had deposited a large sum of several shulker boxes worth of deep slate, I did have to do some runs to get some deep slate, and I don't really have a deep slate mine up and running yet. Ever since we deleted most of our world to get the new terrain, I have yet to start a new base and a new mining colony, so I'm sort of having to live off of the scraps. But it actually didn't take a ton of deep slate, because right now the vaulting is very thin. For most of it's only 1 block thick, and remember, when you craft, slabs, you can get 2 slabs for every 1 regular block.
Yeah.
So you can really get a lot of blocks from a relatively small supply.
It's raining. There's no roof.
Just get under the vaulting.
I'm all wet now.
So when this was being constructed and it rained, where did the water go?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. I think, at least when it comes to the primary vaulting of the central vessel, and again, when I say central vessel, I'm talking about the nave, the transept, the choir, the main hallway that is at the center, surrounded by the smaller aisles that flank it. When that main vaulting is built, they usually build the roof, the wooden roof on top of it first to protect all of the masonry as you then build the vaulting underneath it, so it doesn't get too wet. And usually, as one thing we've learned from the reconstruction efforts at Notre-Dame, ever since we had the fire, we've learned that the different kinds of limestone were used at the vaulting level versus in the buttresses and walls of the cathedral. They tended to use lighter, more porous stone for the high vaults in a Gothic cathedral. And the reason that they did that is because it's lighter, and they're just trying to minimize the weight of the vaulting as much as possible so that, it doesn't become too heavy and push the whole building down. But that also has the problem, like you said, if it gets wet, all that porous limestone can fill up with water, and that can really destabilize the building, which is exactly one of the problems that they were really concerned about right after the fire. They were just as worried about all the water that they had dumped on Notre-Dame, filling up all of that porous limestone, which made it way heavier. It was a little touch and go there in the beginning, when they thought that, maybe this water might push over some more of the walls that are just not designed to hold that much weight.
I'm not used to the concept of, I know this is silly because I'm standing in a Minecraft thing with tons of different facsimiles of stone. I'm not used to stone being different weights. I know that's silly, but I just think of stone as all stone weighs the same, but obviously not.
I mean, part of me is always like, why didn't they build it out of granite? Granite's so hard, and you granite is less likely to get destroyed. But again, when you have a heavier stone, that just throws off the balance of things, and certain structures aren't just going to stay up in the same way. But again, the walls and the buttresses, they built out of a very different kind of limestone that was much harder, more durable.
The videos that you made us watch a couple episodes ago implied that some of the quarries were selected for political reasons. Does Notre Dame have a history of selecting stone that may not have been fit for purpose, and consequences occurred based off of those choices?
I mean, I don't know too much about that, but my guess would be the fact that it lasted 850 years without incident is probably indication that there was no weak points that they they built it from, and the fact that pretty much the building withstood the fire after the whole roof burned off shows that it was a pretty strong building overall. I think examples of, collapses in cathedrals, Beauvais, the classic cathedral that collapsed because it was mostly built too high, although I don't know if any issues with the quality of the stone were applicable to that catastrophe as well. I'll look that one up for you, Zach. That's a good question. I do know that at least a lot of the stone at Notre-Dame was quarried fairly locally from Paris. Like, they've been discovering lots of in the catacombs around Paris where they think much of the limestone was quarried to build it originally. But that's all long depleted, so they've been having to, outsource new locations to get similar looking limestone to rebuild the new stone parts. So it'll be really interesting to see, as it starts to really fit in new stone, what it looks like.
I know you like to have blocks that have every single type of variation in them: stairs, half slab, polished, etc. There's the new calcite block that looks a lot like marble, and it does not have, to the best of my understanding, those variations.
No, it doesn't.
Are there places in your 2-to-1 construction that you can use calcite because it is very pretty, even though you don't have those variations?
Yes, I definitely love calcite. That's one of my more favorite blocks from the later patches that we've gotten. I like calcite in small decorative formations. I like the texture of calcite as a single or maybe a double block. I don't like the look of calcite when it's like a bunch next to each other. I think its repetition, if you stack a bunch of calcite side by side, doesn't look as good. But as a single or double like block, try to mimic like a marble surface, I think it works very well. And I think, for maybe like different capitals in certain spots, or I like to use it a lot in floor tiling. So there'll be definitely places to use calcite.
If we seem a little bit distracted, it's because David and I are enjoying your build in the game.
I noticed you two were grinning in a very odd way, and I can't be on the server with you right now because we were having some internet trouble over here, and we don't want to screw up the podcast recording. Please don't hurt my build. It took a long time to set that up.
No, we're not hurting it.
Not hurting your build. We're just hurting each other.
Yeah.
And for the record, we need to back this up, Zach. I was reading through your instructions, and I was like, I need Zack to walk me through how we're going to run these backups for the server, because if I lose this work now, I'm going to be very sad.
Fair enough.
Speaking of catastrophes, both server-wise and cathedral structure-wise, if at this stage when this was actually built like this, where just these outer vaultings, no central roof, what would have been the biggest risks to the structure at this stage? Or would it have been a pretty stable construction?
At this point, it had been pretty stable. It's not that high yet.
Yeah.
Remember, this is a 2-to-1 build.
Yeah.
So it appears larger in game than it actually was in real life. And when you go in person, it's a tall building, but this is no more tall than maybe a 2 or 3 story regular house or something at this point.
Sure.
The issues with the height of Gothic architecture really start to occur around like the clerestory with the very tall windows in the central vessel that are so tall that not only is the heavy vaulting trying to topple them, but then you've also got the wind forces and stuff. And, this is a very redundant build right now. It's the twin aisle with many columns that are all sort of compressing adjacent vaults side by side. So, I think it's actually quite stable. It's very locked in right now. Talking about at least what the stage of Notre-Dame's setup would have been at this point in time.
Speaking of fire, do we want to turn off fire tick on the server so that we don't have a catastrophic fire destroy all of our wooden structures?
Yeah, maybe for the meantime, that would be good. We have lightning rods now, but I guess I could say that if my tavern went up in a blaze, I'd just say, Zach, set the server back 10 days or something. Although, now that we're not running nightly backups, we're gonna have to talk about that. Yeah, maybe in the meantime, disable fire.
There's also another setting that disables mob griefing, which includes Enderman stealing things. I know we talked about configuring what the Enderman can steal a couple episodes ago or in our early ones, but we can turn it off altogether. And we can also turn off the fact that creeper explosions destroy blocks as well.
I mean, I think the creeper explosions are just like, you're not playing Minecraft if you don't have the creepers blow things up.
Yeah, I agree.
In terms of Endermen are just annoying. So we might consider turning off just moving the dirt, because just finding random dirt everywhere is just stupid.
All right. Well, that was a good update for your 2-to-1.
All right, so how far will you be by next month?
Well, so again,
Which won't be recorded immediately after this.
No, we for the record, you are listening to this episode now several months after we recorded it, which isn't that unusual anyway, but Dave and I are going on a little bit of a hiatus because we are both expecting babies in both of our families. So spoilers. So that means that we've actually been trying to make some preparations so that you can have a nice steady flow of episodes over these next few months. And if we seem a little bit tired when we return, you'll know why.
Sorry that we're not updating you on the latest current events like we usually do, such as the fact that it snowed and the episode came out in June.
Yeah, we've done that before. Also, we should mention that this episode that you're listening to right now is coming out in April. And because of that, that does make this the 1 anniversary of the podcast. So, hooray, guys. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I'm firing off rockets in Minecraft, but Zack left. So I'm just firing off rockets for myself.
Oh.
Also, for us, it's been longer than a year.
That's true. We've been practicing recording and editing just to get a feel for it, probably since, maybe more like 15 to 18 months. But in terms of publication, we're 1 year old, so we'll go with that.
Woo.
And of course, we also timed the anniversary of the podcast in April to line up with the anniversary of the fire at Notre-Dame, so that every time we hit our birthday, we can raise a little more awareness.
We can celebrate the fire.
Says David the arsonist. Is this ever going to get you in trouble one day?
Only if it turns out he's actually the arsonist.
So I want to follow up on our conversation last time where we touched on a bit on culture, but I wanted to take it a little step further. I want to dive into a specific element of culture, and that is art. And this idea was spurred out of a conversation we had after the last time we recorded between Zack and me. And so I wanted to pause it then because I wanted to get some of Zack's thoughts out, recorded for posterity.
Okay.
I think you have very interesting thoughts on truth. So I am very curious about the connections between art and truth.
Oh, time for me to get that margarita.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the
Tom will be back in a bit.
That's right. This is the Zack and David show now. The responsibility of art to speak to truth or not. I think the easiest way to get into this is to share the example that always comes to mind for me. The movie Steve Jobs, written by Aaron Sorkin, is a biopic, ostensibly, about Steve Jobs' life, though it's told in a unique way where the movie is divided into thirds, and each third is telling the story behind the scenes of a specific presentation that Steve Jobs was about to make. I really love this movie. I think it's incredibly well acted. I think the writing is incredibly snappy and fun to listen to. I think the stakes are well done. It is incredibly inaccurate. To the extent that times I've wondered if it's so inaccurate that it might have been better if it was never made in the first place. Despite loving it, I'm not sure that it should exist. Because I do wonder about art, particularly art that is trying to represent real life, a real person's life in this case, has a responsibility, because that's what people are going to more likely to remember. They're more likely to remember that than they are the biography of Steve Jobs. And now they're more likely to have false impressions. So that's my long-winded way of getting into, I'm curious about your thoughts on the responsibility art should have.
So there's a quote in my mind that I couldn't find any attribution to.
Lincoln.
It's Lincoln. But there are two similar quotes. One from Pablo Picasso, and then the other one from Alan Moore, which is two very different visual artists.
Yeah, you could see how they're in the same vein.
So the quote that I know is that artists use lies to tell the truth. Politicians just the opposite. I couldn't find any attribution to that. So the Picasso one doesn't have any mention about politicians. We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize the truth. And then the Alan Moore quote is from V for Vendetta, is my father was a writer. You would have liked him. He used to say that artists use lies to tell the truth, while politicians use them to cover the truth up. And that's not so much a dig at politicians, is it to talk about the responsibility of art in regards to the truth. And I would say that no individual, and also not a collection of individuals, if anyone was thinking I was going to go there, has any access to capital T truth.
Sure.
Not a mathematician who defines what truth is in order for them to use truth later in theorems. So an axiom is a statement that a mathematician writes down, and that is, by definition, truth in the system in which they're working in. And you look at Euclid's 5 postulates. He writes the fifth postulate down. He states it as an axiom. We go for hundreds of years. Mathematicians realize that they can make spaces where that fifth postulate is not truth. So spherical and hyperbolic geometry come out of the idea of recognizing that a statement written down as absolute T truth wasn't absolute T truth. So mathematicians don't have access to it as much as they want to. Mm-hmm. Philosophers don't have access to it as much as they want to. Get the pitchforks out for me, but religious leaders don't have access to it as much as they want you to believe that they do.
Historians probably most relevant for what I was saying.
Historians especially, because I think the better way to think about history is to separate it from the past. And so the past is the stuff that happened, and history is the story we tell about the stuff that happened.
Right.
And so you brought up the Steve Jobs movie. It's not a documentary, but even if it were a documentary, which might theoretically have more ethical responsibility to be as close as possible as it can be to the past, even documentaries have what's called the documentarian's lens.
Yep.
Which is where the filmmaker chooses to focus on, because you're limited to a 2-hour event and you're probably covering something that's more than 2 hours. You have to focus on something, and that focus inherently, even if it's well-intentioned, has the bias of the filmmaker involved. And so instead of trying to accurately capture the past or capture an event or capture the truth in all of its veracity, that's a fool's errand in my mind. And the better target for an artist, and I think this is something that I've been touching on throughout the podcast, is to figure out what emotion, what feeling do you want to invoke in your audience member about a thing. Use the medium that's appropriate for that, and then express yourself that way. And that is much more meaningful to me as a human, and I feel like I want it to be more meaningful to other humans, where we use this word earlier in this podcast, the connections between other people, the feelings you have with other people, the habits you have with other people. Like, that's like the story we tell amongst ourselves is much more important for us as humans than trying to capture the past just as it happened, because that is impossible.
That was really well put. I really appreciated that. As I like to do when you make your grand philosophical
proclamations.
Yeah, proclamations is a good way of putting it. I like to try to poke around it at the edges.
Sure.
Again, I find the Steve Jobs movie very a useful framing device, but I'm going to try to make it broader than just that movie. That's a movie that's depicting someone's actual life and, or at least pieces of it and other people around it. There are decisions that were made in the screenwriting that are close to defamation, I would say, that are, I don't know about the legal definition of defamation, but are intentionally misleading in a negative way about living people who are still alive after Steve Jobs died. Recognizing that nothing, as you say, has complete truth, and so it's just about getting to some semblance of the truth. Is there still a responsibility to not lie in specific ways?
Yeah, I think there's this is Will Wheaton. Don't be a dick. Right? I think like the golden rule of a lot of religions out there come down to treat other people well.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Love thy neighbor, treat them how you would treat yourself. Every religion has some aspect of the golden rule embedded somewhere in there. And so from an ethical perspective, I think you're absolutely right. There is some amount of responsibility not to tear other people down. There is a balancing act that people have to play with that rule, because if someone is using their persona to tear down other people, then you can absolutely find some ethical space to justify disarming them by attacking their persona. I don't think this is true about Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was very effective at selling his idea for how personal computing should operate. And the fact that the PC Mac terminology is confusing here is not helping me. But a Mac is a personal computer. I'm sorry, Mac users. Mac is a personal computer. Live with it.
I don't know if all of us will get over it, but some of us will.
Good. And so he certainly has a vision for how personal computers should operate. And in effort to enact his vision about how personal computers should operate, if he were more destructive in the way that he went about enacting that vision in a way that was deleterious primarily to other people, but either secondarily or tertiary to the computing industry as a whole, right? In order to stop him from doing that destruction, it's not unreasonable to take down the persona of the person in the center of it.
Through the art, you're saying that if you're trying to use art to stop their destructive behavior.
I mean, if you're a lawyer, you can use the law.
Well, sure.
If you're an artist, you can use the art, right? And so certainly if you think that the closed ecosystem nature of Apple computing is deleterious to computing in general, then you want to write some negative think pieces about how Apple took really sort of lackluster hardware and lackluster software, but a really huge marketing arm and a really huge cult of personality to their benefit in order to make people believe that their laptops are worth $300 more than an equivalently powerful non-Mac laptop, right? You could write those pieces. I'm not going to, but they exist certainly out there.
So just to sum up your large, so essentially like it's a follow the golden rule, but the golden rule is also not necessarily just be good to one person, but it can also extend to like use art to be good to society at large, which might involve targeting negatively a specific person if it's serving a larger goal.
It's a combination of turn the other cheek and live by the sword, die by the sword. You have to be able to walk those lines. It's difficult. We do it collectively very, very, very poorly.
I've never heard those both uttered in the same sentence before.
All right, David.
Yeah.
I have a few clarifying questions for you because I want to see if I can pinpoint where your concern is. Okay?
Sure.
So I'm trying to figure out in particular, is your issue with, say, the Steve Jobs movie, again, as an example, is it an issue that is based on time? In other words, is the issue largely based on the fact that there are living people who might be experiencing defamation, like you were saying, because is it not the same issue with, say, Homer's tale of the Iliad? I don't think Eris, the goddess of discord, probably actually chucked an apple that made all the gods then choose Paris to then steal Helen of Troy that then kicked off the Trojan War. So that's not clearly, an accurate historical depiction of that war, but I don't hear many people complaining about the fact that it's not. Now, that's a pretty extreme example.
Yeah, I think recency and living, people, when it's about some people are still living, I do think raises the bar.
Yeah.
I think the second consideration is when it's art that is trying to pretend that it's truth.
But is that Steve Jobs movie trying to pretend that it's truth?
I think in a lot of ways it is. And maybe this is just too hyper-specific of an example, but the medium of movies and TV I think is more pernicious at this than other paintings or sculptures. When you have performances, human performances, I think that's where it gets a little trickier. If they are telling a narrative story over a historical event or a historical person, more people are likely to witness that than a documentary about the same person, because it's entertainment. Entertainment is generally watched by more people. And so more people are going to walk away with believing that is how this happened because they saw the entertainment version rather than the documentarian version. And I acknowledge that neither is full truth. I get that. And I'm in agreement with you there. I think it's also fair to say that the documentary is closer to truth than art is to truth. Maybe the art's getting to a higher truth, but just like in the factual level, if we're just talking about truth as facts, the documentary should be closer than the artistic piece. But more people will see that and associate it with truth, particularly if it's putting itself forward that way.
Well, so obviously the Trojan War was an extreme example of this is a completely different artistic creation that fulfills such a different purpose than the sort of quasi-documentary feel of the Aaron Sorkin Steve Jobs movie, right? Mm-hmm. But maybe a closer comparison, which might warrant something a little more interesting. What about Shakespeare and his histories?
Yeah, no, that is a better example.
What about King Richard III, right? Who is depicted, as a craven, evil king who wants to trade his kingdom for a horse at the very end of the play, just so he can spare his own life and then dies on the battlefield, right? Of course, he still lived maybe, I think, a couple hundred years before Shakespeare wrote the play. But again, he's passing off his plays as histories. At least as far as I know. At least that's how it was marketed to me. Whereas I feel like that is very much in the same vein as, the Steve Jobs quasi-biography. So do you have issue with what Shakespeare did as well?
That's a great point. I think that does go back to what you said earlier with the recency does have a significant weight, and the histories that Shakespeare was writing weren't recent in his time either. He was writing about I don't think he did any history.
A couple hundred years
at a minimum,
usually.
Like the one that sticks in my head the most of his would be Julius Caesar. I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. I'm pretty sure Shakespeare invented the line "et tu, Brute." I
think he did.
I don't think we have a historical record of that, but that is now. Yeah. People assume that Julius Caesar said that,
right?
From something that came out of a playwright's mouth.
There are other lines that Julius Caesar, I believe, are documented, like "Veni Vidi Vici," or as most common people say, "Veni Vidi Vici," although that's not how it's pronounced. But, there are other things, but I think you're right. The "et tu, Brute," I think he created himself.
But we have some responsibility to other people in the things that we create, but we're not in control of how other people receive the art altogether, right? And so if you want to tell a story about someone who uses cult of personality and who uses people in a manipulative way, you shouldn't be restricted to fictional characters only in being able to tell that.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Sorkin specifically tends to write about real people because it has that extra weightiness to it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do a fictional... Another good example in my mind is the movie Greatest Showman, which is ostensibly about P.T. Barnum, but turns him into a hero and P.T. Barnum is no hero.
Sure.
And so it's an opposite extreme. Like that movie's trying to tell a story of,
along the lines again of the Shakespeare histories.
yeah, it's like the message of the movie is inclusivity, yay, to put it in 2 words, which is not what P.T. Barnum was about. He was about spectacle at the expense of humans. But I think the writers of that movie thought they would be more successful at picking a historical figure that people know rather than just like a fictional person at the time, even if it was inspired by or whatever. Just that connection to reality draws people in.
But since people believe all sorts of nonsense stuff, you can't control how everyone receives your art. And
yeah, but you can make it worse. The artist can make the nonsense worse.
Artists certainly can make the nonsense worse. But if you're trying to tell a particular story, you certainly have a responsibility to other living humans, not to royally screw them over. But you certainly shouldn't be restricted as an artist to only tell stories that can't be misconstrued.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't go that far. That'd be the extreme end of what I'm getting at, and I wouldn't go that far. I still think that the artist probably has some. Well, I don't think anyone's disagreed here that the artist has some responsibility. I think we're all just drawing the lines at slightly different places.
Well, and I guess you can't avoid the question at this point, clearly, even if you're trying to be as truthful as possible, some fictions are still going to inevitably come out in works like this.
Yes.
But then the question becomes, what truths are important and what truths don't matter?
Yeah.
Like, for example, we've touted many times, Notre-Dame started construction in 1163, and I assume that number is correct, but I've never actually read any primary sources on that data point. Does it really matter whether it's correct plus or minus 5 years? Maybe to a super specialist historian who's trying to do some kind of comparison between some historical records it would be, but it's only an edge case. There's just an example. If you flip a few numbers, flip a few dates, when does it matter and when doesn't it matter is, I think, the open question.
And the way you framed that, too, of it matters more for the research historian than it does for you, I think is a good point, too.
Yeah.
The audience that it's intended for matters a lot. And I think that's almost a counterpoint to what something I said earlier, where like more people are going to see the entertainment piece than the documentary, even if they're about the same person. But roughly, you have to assume that the audiences of each recognize the differences between the two as well. And you do have to put some responsibility on the audience as well.
It seems like the truths that are most in question are the truths that surround, does individual A, B, or C deserve to be honored? At the end of any major tale, most humans make a judgment or an appraisal. Was this person a good person, or was this person a bad person? Thumbs up, yes, thumbs up, thumbs down. So I guess that's sort of maybe at the apex of the truths that we tend to value the most. I don't know, again, if you would agree with that or not.
No.
Okay. Please share. I'm not wed to anything here.
You're trying to speak for all people, and I am not going to engage in that activity.
Fair enough.
I can speak for myself. I am not interested in whether or not someone was a good person or someone was a bad person. I'm not in Zen Buddhist culture, but I think from my novice interpretation of yin and yang, right, there's darkness in the light and there's light in the darkness. So there's good in all people, there's bad in all people. Right? Calling someone a good person or a bad person is pretty reductive.
I think this is probably my fault, but the point I was trying to convey wasn't simply, a black and white depiction of everything, but most people, again, I think, at least my guess is most people at the end of a tale like to make some kind of value judgment on the humans they saw. However complex that can be. Like, I think generally people try to decide how the humans they witnessed went through the actions they took.
And not necessarily just white and black, but the 1 to 10 scale, gradations in between.
Right.
I largely agree with that.
I think you can easily speak for yourselves.
That's fine.
Fair enough.
Zack doesn't judge.
I do. It's just that I don't judge. I just don't have a Kinsey scale for like.
Why won't you judge me, Zack?
Oh, he is.
Judge me. No,
Is that the name of this episode? Judge me.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So people don't have access to our camera, but there was a thumbs up, thumbs down about whether or not we should honor someone. That was a pretty stark contrast gesture for whether someone falls in the good bucket or someone falls in the bad bucket.
Yes, it was.
And then you acquiesced.
I mean, as with all modeling, you have to simplify things when you're trying to convey ideas.
For a frictionless villain in a vacuum, do they fall into the good bucket or the bad bucket? And you acquiesced to me.
Is the villain spherical?
The villain is spherical. The villain isn't cylindrical. and you acquiesced to me, and you said, all right, maybe good bucket, bad bucket isn't exactly how we actually do it, but there are some things that are good, there are some things that are bad, but we still like to judge where they fall on the good bad spectrum. And that's still it's grating to me, like, to think about it in those terms. I'm not saying you can't think about it in that terms, but like, I like seeing good people in your categorization do bad things in your categorization, and bad people in your categorization do good things. And that doesn't put them like somewhere in the middle of a scale. They're both good and bad. And in such a way where that terminology starts to lose the original meaning of calling someone good or calling someone bad. It's just calling someone like a flawed meat bag, I think, is the term that I used in a previous episode.
I'm going to split the baby because I agree with Zack in that is my preferred way of watching things, figuring out where the good is in the bad and the bad is in the good. But I also do think that I agree with Tom that I think the common way to watch something is to categorize on some sort of spectrum of good to bad. And in some ways that's potato.
It's not though.
But like if you're putting it somewhere on a scale, like that's like this person is 60% good, 40% bad.
I'm advocating against that.
You're saying, but you are saying you're looking for the bad within the good and the good within the bad.
That's your categorization. I was trying to use terms that were familiar to you guys for how I looked at it. And it's obvious there's like a mismatch there.
Okay.
What I'm interested in is an interesting character.
Sure.
And that is divorced from the ideas of good and bad, I think. And an interesting character sometimes hurts people.
Sure.
Because humans sometimes hurt other humans.
So when you watch a movie, Zach,
yeah,
do you root for characters and boo other characters, like mentally, not verbally, although maybe you do verbally? Or do you watch movies so divorced from like, oh, like I'm watching those orcs slaughter all those elves and how interesting this is. What's motivating those orcs to kill all those elves, Or do you still like end up rooting for some characters over others? Like, I really hope those elves live. I don't want to see them get killed off by those orcs.
So like the Uruk-hai, I don't root for. The orcs, I don't root for. Mm-hmm. Saruman also, I don't root for. Mm-hmm. But I find Saruman to be an interesting character. And I watch Lord of the Rings. I haven't read Lord of the Rings since middle school, but when I watch the movies, like when I'm watching it, I'm invested in Saruman. To the elves' point, I find Elrond to be an interesting character. I don't find all elves to be interesting characters.
Well, do you want Saruman to be defeated in the story? Are you hoping that in the end he loses?
Yeah, because I have my own sense of morality and he's causing suffering on other people, right? And I don't want that, and I want him to stop doing that. So I want him to be defeated. But
so if by your own compass of morality, you are then making a judgment call that this person needs to fail, this person is doing bad things.
But the distinction that I have is the things that's interesting to me in art. Like Saruman's an interesting person to me, and he's more interesting of a character to me than some of the quote-unquote good guys.
Yeah, most people say the same thing about Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
Darth Vader is an uninteresting character.
Yeah, but he's probably more interesting than Luke Skywalker. But
he's cooler. But
the point is that you're still making a value judgment over the characters. And in the end, that is probably influencing on how you're hoping the narrative is going to unfold.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tolkien is very clear. The lines are a lot starker in Tolkien than they are in other things. And so
I'll agree with that.
I really do love Lord of the Rings, but I think choosing Lord of the Rings really is one extreme of storytelling. You could say, like, when you read, like, Paradise Lost or something, are you rooting for Mephistopheles? Like, he's an interesting character. Satan is an interesting character. Like, you're not rooting for him to succeed, but, like, I am more enriched as an audience member being exposed to interesting characters more so than I am enriched as an audience member being exposed to simple dualities. And I am going to gravitate towards that to such an extent that, like, the duality part of the conversation is, like, repugnant.
Yeah, and again, I tried to, again, maybe I keep failing, but I tried earlier to emphasize that I was simplifying the value judgment piece just to expedite the conversation, but clearly that backfired.
Well, I think it's that you two are talking past each other.
Really, what gave that away?
But it's like you're not talking in the same spectrum. Zack is acknowledging that there are, on his scale of morality, there are characters that fall on the quote-quote good side and characters that fall on the quote-quote bad side.
On your scale.
You said you have your own morality. So I'm talking.
Yeah, you have your own spectrum.
You said,
but it's not a scale.
No. Okay. Put that aside. Tom is talking in that metric.
Right.
You are talking that on a scale of interestingness, not even a scale. A scale of interesting to not interesting.
But that's
which is divorced. You were saying is divorced from good and bad. I'm trying to agree with you, Zach.
Yes.
And so Tom is trying to superimpose his good and bad scale onto your interesting and not interesting scale, and they're not 1-to-1.
I don't think he is.
Okay, fine. I won't defend you.
No, I think you're largely right. It's just like this is what I was trying to say at the very beginning, which is like you can certainly talk for yourself. If you like a stark contrast and you like having morality plays like in The Next Generation where the best episodes are morality plays. Picard is always the bastion of light and nobility. Right, in the morality play, and he's juxtaposed against something else. If you like that, I'm not trying to take that away from you. My initial rejection was trying to apply that to more than just yourself. So when Tom said, I think most people, XYZ, the thing that popped into my head at the beginning is, well, most people have seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Oh, no. That's it for now. Check out our podcast website at cathedraltalk.fm. There you will find many architectural visuals and Minecraft goodies. If you would like to support our efforts here at Cathedral Talk to aid in the restoration of Notre-Dame, please use the direct link on our website to donate to friendsofnotredamedeparis.org. Friends of Notre Dame is a non-profit organization that is leading the international fundraising efforts to rebuild and restore Notre Dame Cathedral. By donating to them through the link at cathedraltalk.fm, we'll know that our podcast is reaching new patrons. As our own Minecraft project progresses, we'll be sure to share plans, screenshots, and videos for your own visual palette. Good day and happy building.